Bella, you're such a copycat. Yo, is it? We didn't choose the Ruglaff. The Ruglaff chose us. Ralph, I'm trying to read a grown-up book, not a furry tale. Oh, don't you two just look the cat's pajamas? Just a little giggle for that one.
Yeah, it's not that funny.
So I set up a night vision camera to see what the cats did at night. And although both cats were asleep on the bed all night, the camera picked up something kind of spooky. I think it's paranormal captivity. These puns have been so bad, this might win the award for the worst video ever. It's a catastrophe. So most of my cat videos involve my cats having to perform or behave in a specific way, such as dressing up as gangsters, having a cat disco, competing in mazes, or whatever it may be. And as fun as all that stuff is, today I thought I'd give them a day off. And I want to make it their best day ever. Broadly speaking, Ralph and Bella enjoy two things, sleeping and eating, so I want to give them the best sleep and greatest feast of their lives. Let's start with sleeping. Recently, Bella has rather frustratingly taken a shine to my pillow, and it quickly became her favourite place to sleep. I reluctantly let her keep it and bought myself a new pillow, and that worked out fine for a while, but now sometimes she sleeps on my new pillow too. My point is, Bella really likes pillows, so for her best day ever, I bought enough pillows to cover the entire bedroom. I'm so comfortable right now, Bella's gonna love this. I've also put on her favourite CD of whale sounds, and a calming pheromone diffuser. Some people say I spoil these cats. At first, she seems a little overwhelmed, staring at this vast kingdom of pillows. She can't believe her eyes. And then she decides to sit on one of the only patches of carpet. Oh, Bella. But soon she's up on the bed, again trying her best to walk between the pillows, before eventually choosing none other than my pillow.
My pillow.
Really, Bella? All these pillows and you still choose mine? I suppose it is her best day ever, so if this is what she wants, I can't really argue. Look at her, making herself comfortable on my pillow. As for Ralph, during the daytime he tends to sleep on the sofa. There's not much I can do to improve it for him, except put his favourite film on repeat in the background, give him the remote and leave him to it. So far we have two very happy cats, and one mildly irritated owner. But we can do better than just a couple of pillows, so let's move on to every cat's other favourite pastime, eating. Before meeting Bella, Ralph would only eat gourmet cat food. I know that's a kind of stereotypical cat person nonsense you'd expect a cat owner to say, and I guess you'd be right. But when the shop sold out of all the regular cat food during the panic buying last year, the gourmet stuff was all they had left. And once Ralph got a taste for it, he was never going back. That is, until he met Bella and discovered something even more delicious than gourmet cat cuisine. Bella's leftovers. That's right, not gourmet cat food, not even Bella's food fresh from the pouch. He will now only eat Bella's half-eaten leftovers. Yeah, he's a very strange cat. So for their best day ever, I bought them 1,460 pouches of cat food. For context, that's a precise amount they eat between them in a year. It's also over double my body weight, and about the same as 40 Ralphs. Can you imagine that many Ralphs? By the way, we now only have 26 Plectrum packs left on the Half Asleep Chris store, so get one before they're gone forever. The link is in the description. I think I've just blown my cat's minds. Ralph seemed less than impressed, probably because he knew it was all fresh food and not leftovers. Bella, however, loved it. She climbed down, circled the mountain, sniffing it and rubbing against it, and then climbed to its summit triumphantly to survey her kingdom. Doesn't she look glorious? It's so weird to think that over the course of a year they eat this mountain of food and turn it into an equally sized mountain of cat poop. Now you're probably thinking, as incredibly chonky as they may be, Ralph and Bella couldn't possibly eat all of that food in just a single day. Well, I'm sure Bella would give it a very respectable try, but you're probably right. So instead, I'm gonna make each of them a throne out of it. A cat food throne. Once again, they looked glorious, and this time Ralph seemed a lot happier to pose for his photo op as King and Queen. I've just realised the cat on the packet looks a lot like Bella. Next, I continued this channel's tradition and built them a fort out of cat food. I mean, it's pretty ugly to look at, but this is the cat equivalent of Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, where the walls are literally made of cat food. Bella felt right at home, again circling and rubbing up against her palace before exploring inside. Bella looks so cute right now. Ralph had a quick sit inside, but his standards for cat castles are a lot higher by now, so yet again he wasn't impressed. I should probably rename this video just giving Bella her best day ever. And finally, I built a cat food pyramid. I call it the Pyramid. Now, it's not exactly the most stable thing in the world, and I don't really want 150 kilos of cat food toppling down on Ralph and Bella, so I kept them out of the room for this one, and just took a clickbaity thumbnail photo. But after teasing Ralph and Bella with all this food, it's probably time to actually feed them. As for what happens to the rest of it, I'll keep enough to feed Ralph and Bella for a month or two, and once lockdown ends in the next month or so, I'll donate the rest of it to my local cat shelter. It's got a several-year expiry date, so I'll keep you updated in a future video once it's been donated. After their ginormous feast, it was time for more adventures in Pillowland. And you guessed it,
My pillow.
Before we begin, Bella's wearing a donut around her head in a few shots in this video. She has some sensitive skin issues, and the donut is basically a less intrusive alternative to a normal cone. It doesn't restrict her as much, and she actually doesn't mind wearing it at all, although I think she thinks it's a real donut because she's forever trying to taste it. But anyway, let's start the video. A couple of years ago, I wrote my cats, Ralph and Tom, their very own theme song. Ralph and Tom, they're my favourite little pussycats. Ralph and Tom, they're my favourite little dudes. Ralph is very fluffy ears and Tom's a long cat. They hope you like their videos and subscribe too. Without sounding arrogant, I love it. It's one of my favourite videos I've ever made and really represents a happy and wonderful moment in my life. I was living at home at the time, my channel was finally starting to get noticed, and well, Tom was alive. But right at the end of the year, we sadly lost him, and then mid-2020, I moved into a house with my girlfriend Danielle, and she brought along her cat, Bella. Ralph loves having a new friend, but the theme song seemed kind of ill-fitting without Tom around, so I started instead using various instrumental versions. I mean, it's kind of been a running gag to do alternate versions of the song. There was a version when Ralph went missing for a night. Where's Ralph gone? He's not sleeping on his windowsill. Where's Ralph gone? Tom is feeling so alone. We miss his fluffy ears and great big bushy tail. Ralph, if you can hear this, will you please come home? There was an Italian version for the cats of an ancient Roman cat sanctuary.
Raffaele Tomasi,
I miei piccoli gatti preferiti.
Raffaele Tomasi,
I miei piccoli amici.
Raffaele Soffice e Tomasi e Cecco.
Fai una donazione a refugio
e poi.
And Ralph even sang a version himself. Then there's been an acoustic version, an 8-bit version thanks to the channel Mr. Miyagi, and a Christmas version, which was actually the very last thing we ever filmed with Tom. My point is, it's been a beloved part of my channel for as long as most of you have been watching. But there's been a ton of comments asking me to write a new one. Now, I'm reluctant to do so. I don't really like to repeat videos or do something I've already done again. And besides, even if I wrote the world's greatest theme song, it would never compare to the original and nobody would ever like it anywhere near as much. But at the same time, I kind of agreed. The original song seems outdated and inappropriate, so I put out a poll on my community tab asking what I should do. Should I simply write a new theme song, or instead write a theme tune? That is, an instrumental song with no lyrics, but with the cats playing the instruments. But I decided to completely ignore the results and instead pay attention to the comments imploring me not to get rid of the song. Don't worry, cats playing instruments is still gonna happen and it will be amazing. But for now, I think we need to make some small alterations to the much-loved theme song.
Ralph and Tom, they're my favourite little pussycats. Bella too, she's my favourite loaf of bread. It started back with Reggie and his Golden Gate Bridge. Subscribe for all the wonderful adventures ahead.
So we once again have an all-inclusive theme song that honours all of the cats who've made this channel what it is. A few weeks ago, I put a tiny camera on my cat's collar with the aim of revealing his secret life. What it instead revealed was that Ralph really wants to go outside. Since moving house a year ago, Ralph's been an indoor cat along with Bella, but both spend hours a day sat at the windowsill, staring longingly into the garden. The response to that video was a complete mixed bag, with half my audience saying it's cruel to keep a cat indoors, and the other half claiming it's irresponsible to let them outside. In fact, here in the UK, 90% of cats are outdoor cats, whilst in the US, 90% are house cats. So why? Well, the biggest argument for letting your cat out is freedom. They get a virtually unlimited area to explore, have fun and act naturally. It can't be very fun being cooped up indoors. I mean, we all know that after the year we've just had, and your cat is way happier outside. But on the other hand, the great outdoors can be incredibly dangerous. There are cars, predators, catnappers and angry farmers or neighbours who sometimes deliberately leave poison around. And what's more, cats aren't natural, at least not to the UK, and can destroy local bird and wildlife populations. My decision was a combination of these factors. Especially after losing his brother Tom, I'm so much more protective of Ralph, plus we only intend to live in this house for another year or so. Because of this, I've so far kept them inside, but that doesn't really seem fair of me. So I'm going to build Ralph and Bella a catio. A catio, or cat patio, is basically a large walk-in enclosure similar to a chicken run. It means the cats can get some fresh air whilst I get peace of mind, knowing they're both happy and safe. Now my garden is precisely the size of a postage stamp, so we don't have a lot of room to work with, and since I only rent this house, I'm not allowed to drill battens into it, which is how you'd normally build something like this. Instead, it must be entirely freestanding, making things about 1,000,000 times more difficult. My workaround is to cement 6 posts into the ground to provide structural support. Next, I'll build a wooden frame across the front, incorporating a large door, and then build a roof frame on top. Finally, I'll cover the entire structure with mesh to complete the enclosure. So here's a cool build montage. That's the posts all done. The front's all built, now onto the roof. And in only 25 seconds, it was done. I should do everything using a montage. I'd attach wire mesh to the walls and roof, and somehow manage not to mesh it up. With the basic structure finished and cat-proof, I thought it was time to give Ralph and Bella their first lungfuls of fresh air in almost a year. I'll add all the cool climbing bits in a moment, but for now I just really want to get them outside. And with a pour into the unknown, Bella was out, and any reservations she had gone, bravely exploring her new garden. Immediately, she started scratching on the fence posts. Once Ralph realised what was happening, he came to watch from the doorstep. It took him just under a minute to venture outside, which admittedly is a lot less than I thought it would. His senses were in overdrive as he sniffed everything, and his ears and body reacted to every sound. He kept going back inside briefly, just to feel safe before coming out again, and before long, he was exploring every inch of his new catio. And I mean every inch. I think it's time we build him something proper to climb on. But then it rained non-stop for over a week. Ralph wasn't brave enough to even step a paw outside, and I don't blame him. The British weather can be pretty unpleasant. So once it eventually stopped raining, which yes, does occasionally happen, my first job was to add some shelter. I nailed these corrugated roof sheets in with these strange giant nails, which oddly enough are supposed to be hammered in at the peaks, not the troughs as you might expect. I only covered one corner as I didn't want to make it too dark, but hopefully it should give some protection against the British weather. Now it was time to build the adventure playground. The plan is to cement another post in the ground in the middle to attach a circular platform. It will be connected to a larger platform in the corner, with a bridge across to a high-up platform in the other corner. It will all be accessible using a climbing wall on the right. There'll also be 3 platforms on this left wall, staggered to make it easy for Ralph and Bella to climb between them. I got started with the cement straight away, and then miserably failed at their pencil and string trick to draw a perfect circle. I ended up printing one out and cutting around that instead. Next I cut the highest platform to size, and screwed it into place using brackets. Listen to the noise this screwdriver makes when it's struggling. I then attached a diagonal wooden beam for more support. The platform in the other corner was done in a similar way. I thought it was a good time now to attach some lights to the roof before I obstructed everything further and made it too hard to get the ladder in. It was actually really awkward as there wasn't enough room to properly swing the hammer, and I hit my thumb about 432 times. But when they were done, they looked marvellous, and I was even more excited to see them at night. But back to the adventure playground. I built another shelf on the left, and since it was getting late, decided to varnish what I'd done so far and call it a day. The next morning, I screwed 2 planks of wood together using battens on the back to make the climbing wall. I attached these super colourful climbing grips, and then mounted it in place using hinges to get the angle right, plus an extra beam of wood underneath for support, since it's pretty heavy. Next I added a small walkway between this and the centre platform, and then a large walkway between the 2 back platforms. Everything was really starting to take shape now. Now I actually want to put another shelf between these 2 for this. I realise it's highly unlikely the cats will ever sit in it, but I had to at least try. I cut a hole in a sheet of plywood and screwed it in. How cool is this? I cannot wait for Ralph and Bella to never use it. And then I put a shelf directly underneath to create some staggered steps to get between all 3. Finally, I decided the climbing wall was probably a bit too steep, so adjusted the angle and added a final platform to encourage the cats onto it. The catio was entirely finished. Ralph was first up, bravely negotiating the climbing wall and heading straight to the highest point. He quickly realised the birdwatching opportunities the spot offered, and stayed there until he fell asleep. Eventually, he made his way back down the wall, using the grips like I hoped he would. Bella, meanwhile, tried her best to avoid the grips. She's been a bit unwell lately, it's nothing at all to worry about, but she didn't fancy staying outside for too long, before once again doing her absolute best not to use the climbing grips, and heading back inside. I encouraged Ralph onto the staggered platforms, although he took his sweet time. Ultimately, he just wouldn't jump to the final one, so you'll have to wait to see him in the bubble dome. I'll include it in a future video if either he or Bella sits inside. Maybe don't get your hopes up. For now, he went for another climb. before long, the roof sheets were proving their worth. Ralph spent much of the day in his new favourite spot. I think it's safe to say he's a fan of the catio, and it looked nothing short of magical at night. With the evening now drawing to a close, he climbed down and came indoors to sleep, satisfied, tired, and incredibly happy. Foundations of the internet, and none are more iconic than Nyan Cat. And after recreating Money Cat, Bread Cat, and Chemistry Cat last year, it's time to tackle perhaps the most beloved cat meme of them all. We'll need a chonky grey cat. Check. Now Bella wears a donut around her neck to stop her over-grooming, and if we swap it for a pink one, it looks a lot like the Pop-Tart from the meme. You know, those exotic American snacks you can sometimes find in the wild food aisle. Add a blue starry duvet cover for the background and a rainbow sash for the trail, and there we have it. Nyan Cat in real life. Or we can take it a step further. What if we use a green screen, and I wear a bright green morph suit to make it appear as though Bella's floating? Get my other cat Ralph to sing a similar but sufficiently different for copyright reasons song, and voila! My cat Ralph is made almost entirely out of fluff, but in this video, I want to make him out of Lego. Recently, I've become kind of addicted, building a Lego railway around my entire house, and combining 10 Lego roller coasters into one ginormous one. But both those projects were easy. I could make it up as I went along, but now I was trying to accurately recreate a three-dimensional thing as a Lego model, and I really didn't have a clue where to start. So I started with only 2 dimensions. The Lego website has a sort of photo converter, where you upload a picture and it turns it into pixelated Lego art. Print the design, assemble it, and voila! So this seemed like an appropriate first step. The only trouble was, well, Ralph is basically just a shadow with eyes, and when I run his photo through the software, he's basically just a shadow with eyes, and sometimes he doesn't even have any. I tried tons of different photos, but each time he looked like some kind of evil demon monster. So I took some new photos of him, outside with bright natural light, and then did the same with Bella. Exaggerate the contrast and run them through the Legoifier, and it's time for some incredibly mesmerizing time lapses. After 4 hours and some now blisteringly sore fingertips, they were complete. I don't think Bella wants you to see Ralph's, planting her chonky grey cat butt stubbornly in front of it. She did take a brief moment to look at it, but I guess she disapproves because she sat right back down in front of it again. Aside from anything, I just find pixel art wild. How something as complicated and unique as Bella's face can be reduced to just a handful of square blocks. Anyway, with that, let's add a dimension and try my hand at 3D. Now this time, I'm only going to be building Ralph. Since he's one colour all over, all I have to worry about is the shape. But it all gets infinitely more difficult with Bella's different colours, stripes, and of course her donut. And besides, Bella's been the star of loads of videos lately. Ralph's been feeling left out. I do plan on building her out of Lego in the future, but for now, I'm just going to focus on Ralph. My first thought was to use digital Lego software to design the model first. It's like virtual Lego, where you build something brick by brick digitally. But I found that software way too complicated. I mean, just watch me try and place one brick literally next to the other. It just wouldn't go in the right place. It seems so counterintuitive and infuriating. Granted, I could likely put in the effort and actually bother to learn how to use it, but that's not how my scatterbrain works. So instead, I ordered a ridiculous amount of Lego bricks and just started putting them together, and it felt wonderful. This is how I played with Lego as a kid. No instruction booklet, no rules, just fun, trial and error, and imagination. But the end result was also like when I played with Lego as a kid. It looked nothing like Ralph, and besides, I'd massively underestimated the amount of pieces I'd need. I wanted it to be life-size. So whilst I waited for even more pieces to arrive, I thought I'd take a field trip to learn from the pros. Okay, maybe I was just using this as an excuse to go to Legoland, but they certainly had a lot of Lego models, most of them way bigger than what I was trying to build. How cool is that? And Miniland was incredible too, a Lego-made model village, providing tons of inspiration for future videos. Plus, after all that, I did eventually find a Lego cat. Seeing this was genuinely helpful. I know it might seem a bit silly, but seeing what I was trying to build in person really helped me understand how to approach the task. By the time another truly absurd amount of Lego bricks arrived a few days later, I felt a lot more prepared and ready to try again. I wanted Ralph sat up, so began with his front paws. They are a bit blocky, but I'm literally building it with blocks. Next I went for his back feet and butt, to provide the footprint on which to build. I built an extra bit on the right to make his tail, curling round to one side as he usually sits. Now when you see those giant Lego models at Legoland, sorry to ruin the illusion, but they're not entirely made of Lego. They almost always have a steel frame underneath, otherwise they'd simply collapse under their own weight or be way too fragile. Whilst I wouldn't be using a steel frame, I would be using a hidden secret beneath the black exterior, Duplo. Duplo is made by Lego, and a lot of people don't actually realise the two are compatible. A Duplo brick is twice as large as a Lego brick in every dimension, meaning that you need 8 Lego bricks to make one Duplo brick. So yeah, they save you a ton of pieces and therefore money by using them internally. At about halfway, it was time for a snack break. Well, Ralph's a lot more interested in his snack. I guess it is only half finished. With a lot more trial and error, patience, and taking things apart to rebuild differently, I eventually reached Ralph's neck. I did have to add a few pieces to correct it here and there, which means they're not properly anchored in with all the other bricks, but I was generally pleased with how it was looking. His head was a lot more difficult, however. It would be almost impossible to convincingly replicate precisely, whilst limited only to the proportions of Lego bricks, so I was aiming for a more cartoonish version, similar to the drawing of him I've used for years. I used jutting out bricks on his cheeks to replicate the tufts of hair, and grey bricks as a grey hair that sprouts like wildflowers from his ears. Ralph was finished. Or rather, I'm gonna call him Rolf. Ralph and Rolf. Isn't that just marvellous? Okay, Rolf's getting dizzy. Time for them to get acquainted. Ralph liked Rolf so much he started licking him to show his affection. I'm kidding, of course. I wish that's what happened, but I had to bribe him with cat yogurt. In reality, he was completely and utterly disinterested, and now my 50-hour Lego creation smells like cat food. I tried in the catio, on the centre platform and the high-up shelf, but once again, nada. Oh, Ralph, why must you always do this to me? Bella certainly likes Rolf more than she likes the real Ralph, again licking and grooming him, this time without any bribery or persuasion. I'm guessing she could smell some leftover slivery cat residue. Delicious. But she was much happier to sit and pose next to Ralph than Rolf was. I mean, Rolf than Ralph was. This is getting confusing. I guess after all that, it's ultimately my opinion that really matters here. And I quite like it. I mean, it's alright. And after having Rolf around for a few days, I found an unexpected side effect. I kept mistaking him for Ralph, like all the time. Each time I'd feel stupid for getting caught out again, but then I would do it again just moments later. I like to imagine Bella keeps getting the two confused as well, but let's be honest, she looks permanently confused anyway, so it's hard to tell. Now I have to end this video on a sad note. I was recently made aware of a fire at an animal shelter in Florida, the Pet Alliance of Greater Orlando. Whilst 45 cats and 26 dogs were saved, sadly 17 cats didn't make it, including Diesel the greeter cat, pictured here with worker Erin. I've included a donation link in the description, which will go towards rebuilding and continuing their wonderful work.
Hey, I'm Christian J. Simon, and I play Gilbert in the new movie Under Wraps. My character in the movie is a bit of a scary.
Life is a series of counterweights. Whenever something bad happens, something dark or something terrible, something good must always happen in its place, and the scales level out. It's Newton's third law. To every action, there is always opposed and equal reaction. Well, a couple of months ago, I lost my cat Reggie. It was sudden and unexpected, and I was completely heartbroken. One night I went to bed and everything was fine. And the following morning I woke up to Reggie paralysed, and we had to have him put to sleep within the hour. It was so immediate and so final, and there had been no warning. It just happened. And now he was just gone. And this terrible in-between when the scales are tipped by misfortune and sadness, it was unbearable. And then we saw this post online. About the time that Reggie had died, some kittens had been found, abandoned in a cardboard box on a main road in a city centre. They were in desperate need of a home and love and affection, and we had all of those things to provide. And so that's how we ended up with Ralph and Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks is the short-haired one. He's brave and inquisitive, and he always wants to know what you're doing. And Ralph? You fall off. Oh, buddy. Well, let's just say that he'd be lost without his brother. He's got something called a fever coat, these white, fluffy hairs all over his body. It means his mum was unwell during the pregnancy, and unfortunately they never found her. But Ralph's perfectly healthy, and it will fade as he gets older. But for now, it means he's extra cute. I didn't plan on getting a new cat this soon after Reggie's death, let alone two. I was still desperately missing him and overwhelmed by his absence. And I can't deny that I felt guilty, like I was replacing him or forgetting about him, or like this meant that I no longer missed him or something. Reggie. But these were two kittens who needed a counterweight themselves. They were in a bad way, and they needed something positive to tip the scales back in their favour. I managed to get them both playing easily enough, as well as eating from my hand, and by the end of the second night, they were so comfortable with me that I even got them purring for the very first time in their lives. Oh my god. I've got two very purry cats. As for Reggie's bridge, I don't want to encourage the new kittens on the roof when they eventually do go outside, so I've taken it down for now. Maybe one day if they get a little too adventurous, I'll need to put it back up again to keep them safe. But for now, it's making a great ground level toy. I did have to make one slight adjustment to it though. Meet Tom Hanks. He's curious, he's mischievous, and he always wants to be the centre of attention. See, Tom, you've had your turn. And meet Ralph. He's a bit more relaxed. Come on, buddy, you're missing your close-up. The pair are brothers, and we've had them for a couple of months now. Back in the summer, they were dumped in a cardboard box on the main road through Reading city centre. I mean, what kind of a person even does that? But luckily they were found and taken in by a charity, and a month later, we adopted them and brought them home. The time has absolutely flown by, and now summer's turning into winter and the kittens have gotten really big. So I thought it was about time to give you an update on how they're getting on. Update number 1. Ralph's ears are still very hairy. When we first adopted them, Ralph had something called a fever coat, these white fluffy hairs all over his body. It's a sign that his mother was unwell during the pregnancy, but there's no need to worry, he's perfectly healthy. But by now, Ralph has almost entirely lost this coat, all except for the hair growing out of his ears. It would be kind of gross if that was a human, but on a cat, it's super cute. And to be honest, I think they're here to stay. I certainly hope so. Update number 2. Tom Hanks has boundless energy. He's the single most hyperactive cat I've ever known. And he pretty much just looks like an adult cat now, only smaller. So I think it must be his way of reminding us that he is in fact still a kitten. Couple this with his never-ending curiosity, and you have a cat that could be literally anywhere in the house. In sinks, in cupboards, in the washing machine. What have I told you about the washing machine, Tom? He even likes to hide in the bathtub and then pop up and scare the living daylights out of you when you don't know he's there. Which leads me on to update number 3. I guess he must really wear himself out, because when he sleeps, he really sleeps. He loves sleeping on me, or in washing baskets, or down the back of the sofa, or just anywhere really. He's not fussy. He just seems to hit this point where he's been running around the house like crazy, and then all of a sudden it's time to sleep. Update number 4. Ralph's a little more predictable. He can be found on windowsills all over the house. Whether it's my bedroom, the bathroom, the lounge, or the dining room. The dining room's his favourite because it looks over the entrance to the garden, and he's always there waiting for someone to get home. Update number 5. Although they do spend a lot of time doing their own thing, they haven't at all drifted apart and are still very much the best of friends. They used to play fight quite a lot when we first got them, but that was just their way of figuring out who was in charge. Nowadays, they can be frequently found snuggled up together, or helping clean the other in those really hard to reach spots. It's really endearing to see. They've been through a lot together after all. They're sleeping, and Ralph has got his little paw on Tom Hanks's head. And then last of all, update number 6. Ralph loves drinks that aren't his. As soon as there's a glass of water around, it's like he has this finely tuned sense for it and he's immediately up to have a drink. And it's as though he just drinks for the sake of it. He has his own water bowl and never seems particularly interested. But as soon as he sees someone else's drink, he wants it for himself. And I guess that's pretty much it for now. They're growing up so fast, and it's been really rewarding to see them coming out of their shells and developing their own personalities. I've got some more Tom Hanks and Ralph videos in the works, but for now, don't forget to follow me on Instagram for some more regular cat updates, or just general insights into the projects I'm working on. So it's been a while since I made a cat video. 87 days to be precise. And during that time, not a lot has really happened. In case you're new here, Ralph is the fluffy one. And Tom Hanks? Well, we've started calling him Long Cat because of how abnormally long he seems to make his body. Even the vet commented on how exceptionally long he is during a routine checkup. So yeah, Ralph's the fluffy one, and Tom's the Long Cat. And the other night, as I was lying in bed unable to sleep, I wrote them this little theme song in my head. Now, I do stupid stuff like this all the time when I'm having trouble sleeping, but even a couple of weeks later, this one just refused to leave my brain. And so I decided to record it for real. I started with the kick drum. My drum kit is very cheap, and it sounds very cheap, so I'd be mixing my recording with a preset sound off the computer. This way I'd get the real power and clarity of the virtual drum, mixed with the character and home-recorded charm of my own. I did the same thing for the snare drum, which just repeated this little toy box marching drum pattern. Then I added hand claps, tambourine, and shakers. It's all the hand percussion that really gives the song that homemade feel. With the bones of the song starting to take shape, it was time for the bass. Next up was guitar. Again, it was a very simple part, just basic chords and strumming pattern. I really wanted the song to have this classic children's TV theme feel to it, so I didn't want any parts to be overly complicated. Next was xylophone. And it turns out that Tom Hanks is a pretty decent xylophonist. And yes, that is a real word. Ready, Tom? I'm going to count you in. 4, 3, 2... The last thing to record was vocals. Before anyone comments on how terrible our singing is, just remember this is a theme song for my cats recorded in my dining room. We weren't exactly hoping to win any Grammys.
Ralph and Tom, they're my favourite little pussycats. Ralph and Tom, they're my favourite little dudes. Ralph has very fluffy ears and Tom's a long cat. They hope you like their videos and subscribe too.
And as a finishing touch, Ralph wanted to lay down some vocals of his own. And that was it. So for the very first time, I'd like to proudly present to you the Ralph and Tom theme song.
Ralph and Tom, they're my favourite little pussycats. Ralph and Tom, they're my favourite little dudes. Ralph has very fluffy ears and Tom's a long cat. They hope you like their videos and subscribe too.
This week marks 6 months since we adopted the kittens, and they're not exactly kittens anymore. Tom Hanks is a fully fledged cool cat, the kind who spends a good portion of the day ignoring you and pretending he's too cool for affection, only to turn into a high-maintenance purr machine each evening. And Ralph, well, he's since become a lot more sociable, although he still enjoys time by himself on windowsills, in the bathtub, and pretending he's a monster under the bed. And we've not let them outside just yet. We felt they just needed a bit more time to fully bond with us. In the meantime, they don't seem particularly bothered about being stuck indoors, although Ralph's become a rather keen amateur birdwatcher. Now, I don't consider myself quite crazy cat person enough to throw them an all-out half-birthday party, but I do want to use the opportunity to spoil them even more than usual, and try out some weird and wonderful cat toys and gadgets I've been itching to buy. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. First up was the cat activity board. It's full of these little nooks and crannies that you fill with treats, and the cat has to really think about how to get to them. And to go with it, I bought them a whole load of treats. Tom Hanks is in charge, so Ralph didn't really get a look in to begin with, but Tom seemed to be enjoying himself. He couldn't really get the hang of the clear bowls and soon grew frustrated, which meant it was Ralph's turn. And Ralph seemed to be much more dexterous, particularly when it came to the tunnel. Overall, Tom Hanks gave the toy a firm 7, I think he'd prefer being quite literally spoon-fed the treats, but it did get him thinking and a bit more engaged than normal. Ralph was a bit less generous with his score. He's definitely not as food-oriented as his brother, so it's a 5 from him. Using all that brain power is thirsty work, so the second gadget came as a welcome relief. It's a cat drinking fountain. Lots of cats will only drink from running water, and Ralph in particular can be a bit funny about what he drinks, often preferring to drink from glasses and cups around the house and his own water bowl, so I had a feeling he was gonna like this one. Tom Hanks seemed very interested when it was empty, but lost all of that interest when I added the water. Ralph, however, was straight over, as predicted, and absolutely loved it. I think we're gonna have to find a permanent spot to keep it now. Tom gave a 2, but Ralph didn't hold back, awarding the fountain 10 out of 10. Next up was the scratching arch, consisting of a carpet-covered base and a wire frame covered in bristles. Tom Hanks took an immediate shine to it. If I'm honest, I didn't really expect either to be fussed by this one, but I've literally never seen Tom behave in this way before. In fact, I'd go as far as to say I've never seen any cat this enamoured with anything before. Once again, Ralph didn't really get much of a turn. He did have a brief sniff, but couldn't really see what all the fuss was about. Given Tom's reaction, I'm sure this is something Ralph will warm to later, but for now, it's a disinterested 2 out of 10, whereas Tom Hanks unquestionably awarded full marks. I saw this fourth present online a while ago and just had to try it out. It's these grooming gloves covered in silicone spikes that massage the cat and remove loose hair. I tried it out with Ralph first, given the fact that he's an enormous fluff ball. And he loved them. He was purring within seconds and rolling over to let me reach his other side and fluffy belly. Tom Hanks was pretty indifferent. I wouldn't say he disliked them, but he definitely wasn't interested. One of the big features of these gloves in all the reviews is how easy they're supposed to be to clean. And it was kind of gross, but the hair came straight off in this huge thick web. At least it will mean less hair shed around the house, or later coughed up as a hairball. From Ralph it was another 10, and a 2 from Tom. This last gadget was something I stumbled across in a shop. It was the last one they had, and reduced, because the dome is a bit scuffed. I didn't really expect them to like it, but I thought I might as well try it out nonetheless. It might seem cruel to confine a cat to such a small space, but these rucksacks are intended as an alternative to the conventional cat carrier. The cat isn't really supposed to enjoy it, but it serves a purpose. It's functional. And as the cats are still housebound, I thought I could use it to give them a little taste of the outdoors. Tom Hanks didn't have any trouble getting in, but I don't think he really liked it. I took him outside only very briefly, but then it became really clear he didn't like it, and so I immediately came back in. I didn't even bother with Ralph. Even as an alternative to a cat carrier, it just doesn't feel very secure. I could feel Tom wriggling around, and there wasn't enough space for him to settle down and get comfortable. So from me, it's a definite 0, and Tom Hanks too. If you have any recommendations of toys and gadgets your cat loves, I'd love to hear from you. But until then, I hope you enjoyed the video as much as we did. This is Ralph. He's a gigantic fluff ball. And his brother Tom? Well, he's due back any second now. We adopted them as rescue kittens just under a year ago and have been living happily ever after ever since. But tomorrow is a big day, maybe the biggest in their lives so far. Tomorrow, they'll be going outside for the very first time. Now, I know what you're probably thinking, because I was thinking it too. The great outdoors isn't safe. What if they get hit by a car? What if they get in a fight with another cat? Or what if they run away or can't find their way home? Honestly, I'd like nothing more than to cover them in bubble wrap and never let them outside. But bubble wrap's expensive and that would be wildly impractical. Instead, we'd do everything in our power to make going outside as safe as we possibly could. Step 1. Both cats have been neutered, microchipped and fully vaccinated. This keeps them safe and keeps other cats in the neighbourhood safe too. Step 2. They won't be allowed out at night. Being black, they're almost impossible to see when it's dark, and this just adds a whole new level of danger. We even had to install LED lights on the stairs to leave on overnight so that we wouldn't accidentally stand on them. Step 3. Even still, as a precaution, they'll both wear entirely reflective collars, just in case they don't come home for some reason. And they're quick release collars, which means they break away and fall off if they get caught on a tree so they don't hurt themselves. From prior experience, I know how quickly cats can get through these things, so I've stocked up in advance. These collars also have bells, which makes it much harder for the cats to catch local wildlife, which is something I'm always really concerned about. Cats hunt best when they can sneak up on their prey, and these bells take away that element of stealth they rely upon so much. And step 4, we've put up a 6-foot fence securing the last part of the garden. I realise that cats are excellent jumpers, but hopefully this will serve as a sort of physical boundary of the garden, and what would ideally be the extent of their territory. We'd also done some general preparations over the last few weeks, such as training them to use a cat flap by putting one in the lounge door, and feeding them at the same time each day to get them in a good routine, which would hopefully make coming home on time a lot easier. Everything was ready and in place. All we could do now was hope for the best and get a good night's sleep. Wakey wakey sleepyheads, you ready to go outside? The plan was to open the door and let the cats find their own way out. It was early morning and they hadn't been fed yet, so it should be easy enough to get them back inside again. We'd let them out for half an hour, supervised constantly, and then do the same thing tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, until they were fully accustomed and we felt happy with them going out by themselves. Come on, boys. And it was thoroughly anticlimactic. They just sat there nervously for precisely 7.5 minutes. I mean, it was really interesting to see how hyper-aware they both were, ears twitching and eyes flicking at any slight noise or movement, but they were far more cautious than I'd anticipated. Tom eventually mustered up the courage to send out a single exploratory paw. Good boy, Tom Hanks. Before promptly deciding against it again. Ah, so close. Ralph was the first to venture down to the outside doormat, quickly followed by his brother. And almost immediately they spotted a butterfly. Look how in sync they are. And that was pretty much it for the first day. But by the second, they were already a lot braver, exploring the bushes and trees that line one side of the garden. They were still very jumpy, and would retreat to the house every couple of minutes. And from there, they just sort of transitioned into fully outdoor cats. It took a few weeks, but it got to the point where we no longer needed to supervise them, and they'd come and go as they please, with the only restriction being that they were kept in after dark. Ralphie! Both cats really enjoyed being outside, and it was nice for us too. We no longer needed to worry about accidentally leaving the door open, or them escaping through open windows. Everything had gone exactly to plan. Until now. It was a month or so later, and Ralph didn't come home. He wouldn't respond to our calls, and we couldn't find him anywhere. Now, I know this might not seem like it's anything to worry about, but this was really out of character. Ralph's a very shy and timid cat, and very dependent on his brother. We were genuinely worried. I went looking around the neighbourhood, hoping my torch would catch his reflective collar, or that he'd eventually be able to hear me calling. But there was no sign of him anywhere.
Where's Ralph gone? He's not sleeping on his windowsill. Where's Ralph gone? Tom is feeling so alone. We miss his fluffy ears and great big bushy tail. Ralph, if you can hear this, will you please come home?
This is Ralph. He's a fluff ball. This is Tom. He time travels. They're brothers we adopted as rescue kittens, and we've just let them outside for the first ever time. They're not allowed out after dark to keep them safe, and everything had been going perfectly well until last night, when Ralph never came home.
Where's Ralph gone? He's not sleeping on his windowsill. Where's Ralph gone? Tom is feeling so alone. We miss his fluffy ears and great big bushy tail. Ralph, if you can hear this, will you please come home?
And Ralph did come home eventually. Ralphie! It was 6 a.m. when he just waltzed in, ate a bowl and a half of food, and slept for a day straight. Tom was very relieved, as were we all, but I was also slightly perplexed. Just where exactly had he been? Did he have a second family? But then it would be unlikely he'd be so hungry and tired when he returned home. Did he get shut in someone's shed or garage? We once accidentally locked my old cat, Reggie, in our garage overnight. We were so mortified that we then put a cat flap in the door to stop it happening again. So that was another option. Was it simply the hot weather? With his enormous fluffy coat, Ralph tends to sleep indoors on these hot summer days, so maybe he wanted to go out and explore all night. Or maybe Ralph was a superhero, a shy, unassuming fluffball by day and a fearless crime-fighting hero by night. I guess we'd never know where he'd been, but there was a way of finding out in future. This is a GPS tracking device. It's extremely lightweight, waterproof, and clips onto a cat's collar, providing real-time tracking data to your phone or computer. And in the weeks between Ralph's late night adventure and the GPS tracker being delivered, he did it again, twice. Ralph was making a habit of disappearing, and this device would be the key to unlocking his secret life. So let me introduce you to the neighbourhood. We'll call this main road the Green Mile. Off it comes my road, Perdition Road, and from that Snake's Cast Away, a short curved road with an alleyway at the end, leading to Big Park. All three roads are lined by a mixture of semi-detached houses and detached bungalows. We live here, right on the corner. Now, certain details have been changed or missed out for my privacy, but all the key details are there in some form, and it will sufficiently allow me to display the GPS data accurately, without giving away my location. With that out of the way, it was time to begin. I'd be putting the GPS collar on Tom first. I get the impression that he stays a lot closer to home than his brother. He's always been the more social of the two, and really likes company and being around us. He always comes when we call him, and I don't imagine he really goes far. Because of this, I was hoping he'd provide a normal sort of baseline of what to expect. And as predicted, it was really boring. After I put the collar on and he left the house, Tom went and sat beside Punk the guinea pig. The two have become rather close and really seem to enjoy each other's company. I mean, I'm sure Tom would probably try and eat him given the chance, but with the bars in the way, they're the best of friends. He spent about 30 minutes there, came inside for something to eat, then went back out and found a comfy spot in the flower beds, where he slept for 6 whole hours. When he awoke, Tom came in for some more food, and then fell asleep for a further 2 hours on his favourite chair. Both cats went out together about 7 o'clock, where they vanished over the neighbour's fence to the north. Although I couldn't see anything, the GPS data revealed that Tom more or less just stayed still for half an hour. I don't believe it. I think he must be sleeping again. And then it was getting kinda late, so I called the cats in, and both Ralph and Tom came in together for the night. There was nothing unexpected here. Everything Tom had done today I'd physically seen him do before, and he stayed within a very small radius of home. The only real surprise was the sheer amount of time he seemed to spend sleeping. Hey, Tom. I would love to be a cat. But tomorrow, Ralph's turn would prove a lot more interesting. Well, admittedly he slept indoors all day, without going outside even once. But then the GPS data shows he went out around 7 PM. Now, I immediately had a feeling he was gonna pull an all-nighter, so I decided to set up this motion-censored wildlife camera I have, just in case. I aimed it at the cat flap so it would film all the comings and goings throughout the night, if Ralph did indeed stay out. And he did. The first recording came at 7:25, and shows Tom deciding whether or not to come in. I should mention that the camera is a bit weird, in that there's a countdown before it starts filming that you're unable to turn off, during which it takes 3 photos. This means it generally misses a lot of what you actually wanted it to film, which is super annoying. But anyway, Tom decided against coming in, and because Ralph hadn't come home yet, I left the cat flap unlocked, meaning Tom had the option of staying out too. And Tom did stay out, until the next activity on the camera at midnight, when he came in for the night. He came and slept beside me until the morning, although I have no idea where he was for those previous 4.5 hours. Meanwhile, however, Ralph was on one of his adventures. From when he'd initially left at 7, he crossed the road and went into the garden of a bungalow on Castaway. He stayed there for some time. Maybe there's a nice spot to sit, or maybe they have a friendly cat or human. After an hour or so, he looped round the other side of the bungalow and crossed Petition Road again, into our neighbour's garden to the north, where Tom and him had gone yesterday. From here, it was back across the road again, where he skirted the edges of Big Park. There's a narrow but dense strip of woodland here, and Ralph took his time wandering through it. And then it was swiftly back between the bungalows and home. By now it was 3:27 AM, and Ralph came in for a whole 3.5 minutes, presumably for some food, as he was licking his lips when he came out again. He travelled north, heading straight back to where he'd just been on the edge of Big Park. He dipped down slightly and travelled east through some gardens, crossed the alleyway and turned south. Now, I'm not really sure what this area is, but Ralph did this rather odd circuit. Maybe he was walking around an obstacle, or maybe he was just exploring, but then it was out onto Castaway before weaving back in the other side of the house. Again, he did a wide loop around these gardens and doubled back on himself, crossing the road to the bungalow from earlier. Ralph stayed here again for quite some time. There's clearly something he likes about this garden, and from here he came home, entering the cat flap at 5:09. But he still wasn't done. 10 minutes later, he left yet again, heading back to his favourite bungalow. After a half hour, he turned around, crossing Petition Road and briefly entering our own garden, before hopping the fence to our neighbours to the north. He spent a few minutes here, and then ventured slightly further north into another garden, before eventually looping around and coming home. He entered the cat flap for good at 7:27, by which time it was daylight, and came and joined Tom and me sleeping. Mystery solved. Sort of. I'm still convinced he's a superhero. But this whole exercise had been fascinating. I'm not a cat behaviourist, so I can't pretend to analyse what any of this information means, whether Ralph was patrolling his territory, or just simply exploring and having fun. But it had been really illuminating to see just how different Ralph and Tom are. Tom barely left the garden, whereas Ralph travelled almost 300 metres from home. I'm hoping that maybe in the autumn and winter he'll calm down and stay a bit closer, but at least both cats are going nowhere near the main road. And they're clearly very happy, which is by far the most important thing. Ralph may only be a small cat, but he'd certainly been on a big adventure.
Ralph and Tom, they're my favourite little pussycats. Ralph and Tom.